Club. So, I'm Tabitha. Good morning to those who don't know me. And together with Laura and an amazing team, they are truly amazing. We are leading this church, right? And so, if you want to get to know us a little bit better, please, we are nice, right, Laura? We are really nice. We do our best. We are true Belgians, so we are sometimes a little bit socially awkward. For all of those who come from a different nation into this, oh, I'm rabbit trailing already. I haven't even started. Stop the clock, please. Can I have my 40 minutes back? Well, let me start by praying before I'm lost completely. Father, I pray that as we are looking at the very end, when you close off the Sermon on the Mount, I pray that you help me to preach your word, God, with conviction and boldness, God. I pray that our hearts will be open, that we will be doers of your word and not just hearers. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, the summer comes to an end, and so does our sermon series. It has been a very long sermon series that we've been doing. Normally, a sermon series is around 4 weeks, but this one, we started all the way back in July. Remember, we started with looking at blessed, blessed, blessed. But blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who persecuted. And we went passage by passage through the Sermon on the Mount. And even though it might have felt like it was a very long series, when you actually do a deep dive into the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 to 7, find that we actually just skimmed over it. We just took here and there a little bit. And so I hope you learned something. I hope even more that you applied some of it. But I want to give you some homework. I love giving homework. To just take the couple of months, even let's continue to just look at it, because there's so much in it. And the goal of the Sermon on the Mount is not just, like I said, I'm going to say it over and over, not just to hear it, but to do it, start doing it. And so today we're going to look at a tree and its fruit. As you see, I switched. Normally we should, for those who really paid attention, we should have done the golden rule, but we're going to look at that next week during the baby dedication. And today I'm going to do a deep dive into a tree and its fruit. But I just want to give a little adds on to last week's sermon. So I want to take that from my time of last week's sermon, just saying. Last week we looked at, remember, judge not, where Jesus said it very clearly. Judge not, and we looked at how that actually means, what he actually meant was condemn not. Didn't say don't evaluate things, condemn not. And then we looked at when there is a situation that needs where you see something in someone else's eye, in someone else's life, first do some introspection, self-reflection before you go there. Remember that, the beam and the speck. Now I want to give some context to that, because some of you might have sat through that sermon and said, but what about abuse? What if there is abuse? Does that mean that that Jesus is just saying, well, judge not, do some introspection, and stay away from it? Well, what do I say over and over again? You must have been tired of me saying that. Context, 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 right? And so the Sermon on the Mount is one of the 5 teaching parts that we find Jesus giving in Matthew. And in Matthew 18, we find Jesus addressing some of that. We find the disciples coming to Jesus and say, who's the greatest? Remember that passage? Some of you know that. They were just like all of us, I want to be the greatest. And Jesus takes a child and puts it in the middle and says, unless you become like a child, you won't be the greatest. And then Jesus says something remarkable, because he says, and if anyone dares to touch this child, basically abuse it, it's better for it to be thrown, that person, to the bottom of the sea with a big stone around its neck. That sounds like judging, right? Sounds like clear judging. And so like we looked at it last week, Jesus doesn't give like a checklist, but he gives like a compass. And he is aware that while we are on this earth, there will happen abuse, unfortunately. And he says, I am not okay with it, and neither should you. And then when you read through Matthew 18, you see that Jesus gives a framework in how to handle it when your brother sins against you. And he says, first go and talk to it one-on-one. And if that brother is not listening, take someone with you. And then if he's still not wanting to listen, bring it to the whole congregation. But I just want to include that because I do know abuse happens. And I wanted to kind of make sure you understand that Jesus is not tolerating abuse as well. Does that make clear? Okay? Okay. That being said, let's look at the end of this Sermon on the Mount. And we're first going to read a bit. And it starts with Jesus saying, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Beware of false prophet who comes to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but a diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fail, because it has been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who builds his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the wind blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. And when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished by its teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. When most of the Bibles that you might be reading, you see different headings. And so it feels like what I've been reading is like different things that Jesus is discussing. But actually, they make part of one big story that he's telling. And so what does those things have to do with each other? So today, we're going to look at narrow and hard, false prophets, and a secure life. Are you ready? Let's start. And I was inspired this week, so I have some pictures for you guys. That's like a bonus. Well, who knows what this stands for? Yeah, have you walked it? Yeah, exactly. This is a sign from the Camino Way. And the Camino Way is like a pilgrimage passage that you can do. The most classic one starts in France and goes all over the Pyrenees. I have no idea how to say that in English, but it's probably something like that. The mountains, right? And then goes to Spain. And the classic one is around 780 kilometers, and you can walk it in 30 to 40 days. You do it by foot, by the way, not by car. That's the goal. When you walk 20-25 kilometers a day. And it takes you to different scenes, different undergrounds, landscapes, vineyards, mountains, and all those things. And in the past 2 years, I had two friends who did part of it. They did it, they planned to do it on their own, and so they prepared for it, and one of them was even like weighing everything that should go in the backpack, because if you have to carry it all the way, you better weigh it out, because those extra pants, you might not need them that much as you want them, because they are weighty, right? And so they did that, and they both started. And one of them was telling me that the biggest challenge is not as much the walking. You know what the biggest challenge is? You bump into yourself. As you are walking, you are left with your own thoughts, with your own things. And that, as everyone says, is the hardest thing of walking this Camino. Here comes Jesus at the end of this sermon. And I don't know about you, but maybe you picked it up, that again and again, Jesus is confronting his audience with their heart motives. You see that? Whether it's to not collect treasures here on the earth, but in heaven. Whether during the sermon of Leah, where is she there in the back? Leah, where she looked at higher standards, where Jesus said, you know what? Adultery, sin is not when you actually do adultery. It's when you look lustfully upon someone else. That is when you have committed adultery. Remember? And again, what is Jesus doing? He's confronting us. Not just his audience back then, but if you allowed him, he's confronting all of us with the state of our own hearts. And so here at the end of the sermon, Jesus gives this picture of this road, right? He starts by saying, enter a narrow gate. And this narrow gate leads you to a narrow road. But as we see throughout the Bible, he always gives two options. He makes it very clear. This is not something new that Jesus does. We see it from the beginning. We see that God gave a tree of knowledge of good and evil and another tree. And he says, pick which one you're going to choose. Then we go to Moses. Some of you know the name Moses. And he says, today I put good blessings and curses before you. Choose which one you want to do. And here comes Jesus building on this tradition and saying, here is a picture of two roads. One with a narrow gate and a hard road, and one with a wide gate and a wide road. And so I'm a simple girl, so this week I was thinking about this, and I was like, okay, why is the road narrow? And obviously, it's there. I love it when it's just easy, right? It says, few walk on it. And I pictured when you have a road through rough terrain and there's only a couple of people that have ever walked there, the road stays hard and narrow, right? When a lot of people walk on the same road, no matter how it was at the beginning, it becomes flattened and wide, right? And so Jesus paints this picture. Can you see it? Can you see it? Where you are walking on this road, where there are two roads, and one is where there's a lot of people going, and because of it, it is easy, and there's this flow and momentum in it. And then he gives you another picture of this small, rough terrain with this narrow gate. But he doesn't stop there. He says, he invites us to not just look at the road and how it is formed and how easy or rough it is. He invites us to lift up our eyes and look at the destination. That is something hard for us people, isn't it? Because we like the now. We like to see the now and make a choice based off what fits us right here, right now. And Jesus says, look up to the end. This might be a narrow road. It might be a small gate. But there's life at the end. Here you have another road. It might be easy. You might have a lot of people that you can encounter on it. But look at the end. It's not going to give you life. It's going to give you destruction. I wish God didn't give us a choice. I wish he would just eliminate the one that leads to destruction. And so if I don't have a choice, if I don't know it, I can just pick the right one. And the reason why I want that is because I know I will be tempted to the other one, right? I don't pretend to be more than anyone else. But still, God gives us a choice again and again. And he doesn't hold back on saying that it's going to be narrow and not always easy. But he does give us this picture of where the road is actually going. And again, he shows that and he says, I want to give you life. I want to give you life. It is said that Mother Teresa said that her life here on earth, our lives here on earth, when we would be in eternity, we would look back on it, it would be like one night in a bad hotel. Just one night. We can handle one night, right? One night we can do that. But so often we just look at this life and we think we don't have a picture of eternity. We measure our lives by our days here on earth. And this is where it becomes hard, because then the road suddenly becomes long and hard. So my friend on the Camino, one of my friends, regularly sent me, we call them voices, but they turn out to be podcasts because they get so long, tell our stories in there. And she was telling how on this Camino, even though she set out to do it alone, they met other people who were walking as well the Camino. And there's an enormous friendliness and interest in that community. And so if you are walking there, you bump into someone else who also is walking it, and then you can walk a little bit together, and then your roads may go different. But people are very open to talk about their journey and if they've done it before. And she met different people. She met, I remember, a mother with a baby and a toddler who was walking the Camino. Laura, might be an idea to you. And then she met an elderly couple who had done it multiple times. And at one point, they were having, I think it was with this elderly couple, they were sitting for lunch together. And the elderly couple noticed that the clouds became dark. And because she had done it before, they immediately said, we shouldn't be walking the next portion of our trip. We should take a cab to the hostel where we are staying. And they asked, like, hey, do you want to join? And my friend said, yeah, please, can I join? And sure enough, as they are in the cab, the water just pours out of heaven. And she realized that because of the experience of this elderly couple, she was safe in the car instead of trying to just think it will be okay. And in the same way, God is aware that as we are walking on this road, we need people in our lives that will point us to the road that gives us the life, isn't it? Yes, there will be parts maybe where we walk a little bit alone, and each one is responsible for his walk wherever they choose to go. But God has not left us alone. And in the Old Testament, they were called prophets. And so what is a prophet? Prophets were there, and they were speaking on behalf of God to point the people towards that narrow road, towards the road that led to life. Does that make sense? Now, there were some, if you are aware of the Old Testament, which is a part of the Bible before Jesus, you might have bumped into some of those prophets, because we have some writings of them. We have Isaiah, we have Jeremiah, we have Zephaniah, where I just read something. We have a guy called Habakkuk, which is a weird name, but if you ever look for an original name, you can definitely use that one. You have different ones, right? But then if you read through the Old Testament, you also might have encountered some of the warnings against false prophets. Those were people who said they were talking on behalf of God, but they were actually, and that they were pointing towards the road to life, but they were actually pointing you to a different road, a road that led to destruction. They would be the ones that you have lunch with on your Camino and said like, oh no, it's all fine. Those clouds, they're just going to magically disappear. Just keep walking. And sure enough, before you are walking, you're in a thunderstorm. And you realize like that was not the advice that I needed, right? And so, at the same time, while Jesus is picturing this picture of those two roads, he continues and he says, beware of false prophets. Beware of people who point you actually not to the narrow road that leads to life, where I want to give you life, but to a different road. Who come to you in sheep clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. People of God are often compared to sheep. Now, sheep, don't think they're so brilliant. They're actually stubborn and all those things, which is a great example for most of us, including myself, right? Ask my husband. I can be, in the nicest way, stubborn, but nice, right? Nice. Can you just confirm? Just laughing at me. But those people, they're actually pretending that they are part of the people of God, but they're actually there with a different motive. They're there to kill, steal, and destroy because that's what the wolf does. And then Jesus gives us again some compass on how to know who you should listen to. Who will point you actually to the road of life? He says you will recognize them by their fruit. And then he speaks about grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs and thistles. So he says the very clear picture of saying every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor a diseased tree bear good fruit. And so every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire, and thus you will recognize them by their fruit. So, let me pause there first. In the Old Testament, I told you that there were prophets sent by God, people that spoke on behalf of God, but then there were some people that were actually using the name of God, said God had revealed himself to them, but actually led the people astray. Okay? Now, the Bible does have, God did give some criteria for them to recognize. We find them in Deuteronomium. That sounds very Flemish because it was. 13, we find verse 1 and 4 for those who are taking notes. You find that God said, you know what? If a prophet is doing like signs and wonders, but then actually says, well, let's turn away from God and go to another God, that's a clear sign for you. Don't follow them, even if they have the wonders and the signs and all those things. So if they even vocally says, don't go to God, go to another God, that's a clear sign. Sounds easy, right? We can remember that. Second one, where we find it, is in Deuteronomium 18, and that is a little bit harder because there God says, if a prophet prophesies something, that says something that will happen, but it's not happening, that's a sign as well. Sounds easy, right? But it isn't. Because here we are in our Bibles, in your Bibles, and you have Jeremiah and Isaiah. They prophesied things about the second coming of Jesus, which means Jesus is going to come back. Has that happened already? Are they false prophets then? Because they have been dead for ages. And that was actually one of the reasons what they held against Jeremiah, saying like, you are prophesying. Those things are not coming to pass, so you must be a false prophet. And we know he's not. He spoke God. So that already is hard, right? So how do we know that the people in our lives, let's make it more general than just prophets, the people in our lives are actually pointing us to God? And so here comes Jesus, and he gives two pictures, and the first one is of a tree, and I think I've got, you see, I was generous to you. Oh, I have some pictures for all the visual people. Gives two pictures. A picture of a tree with lush fruit and all those things, and then of a thorn bush. Apparently that is a thorn bush. You don't want to touch that, right? Because you're gonna harm yourself. That's the word, yeah. And Jesus says it's obvious. You're not expecting apples and oranges from a tree like that. And neither do you expect thorns from a tree, an orange tree, right? So what is Jesus actually saying? Jesus is saying, look at someone over the course of their lives, and it will become, in most cases, clear what they're made of. Don't go too fast with someone. Don't give some room, give some time. Look at their lives. Because in most cases, you will see what they are carrying. We see that Paul speaks about that as well, right? He says, eagerly look for prophecy, eagerly desire prophecy, eagerly look for hearing from God's voice. But then he says, test it. We are sometimes afraid to test it. Well, the Bible is clear and says, like, you know what? We're living, and last week I spoke about that as well. Jesus gave this parable about this man who had a field and who sows good things in it, but then in the night someone else comes and sows other things in it. And it comes up together, and the servants are all in panic and say like, God, someone at night came and like ruined and shall we take it out? And what does the owner says? He says, don't take it out, because if you take it out now, you will also harm the good plants. And so Jesus is aware that we are living at this side of heaven in a world where it is mixed. And if we look at our own hearts, it's sometimes mixed. Can we agree? And so Jesus says, don't be afraid to test things. Last week we spoke about self-evaluation. Test your own heart as well. Can we say that, right? But don't be naive. Sometimes we as Christians, we are looked upon as naive, right? God says, don't be naive. Be wise. Be wise. And before you just let someone point you in all sorts of direction, take a step back. Look at the fruit they're carrying. But then Jesus, being Jesus, he knows that sometimes you can't know. Sometimes this is not enough. And so he continues and says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. And on that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I will never know you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. So the first picture that Jesus paints for us is of a tree. And now he moves to another picture, and it's one of a courtroom. See that? And there's God sitting, or Jesus sitting there. And we know that one day that will happen. And he has his people before him. And he shows the picture, he paints the picture of some of those people coming, and they have a confrontation with Jesus. And they come to him and say, like, Lord, Lord, look at what we've done. Signs, we had wonders, we prophesied. And yet Jesus says, I never knew you. We are so often blown away by signs and wonders. Can we agree on that? By someone who prophesies. Oh, wow, there's someone who prophesies. That's just all. I hope they can pray for me. I hope they can. Oh, wow, they have like this. Jesus is not saying that's wrong. Quite the contrary, we see in the rest of Scripture that Jesus says, they will do greater things than I did. Jesus prophesied. Jesus did signs and wonders. And that is a sign also of God being there, but not always, Jesus says. Don't be blinded with that. Don't run around after someone just because of that. Because here Jesus says two things. First of all, they didn't do the will of my Father. That's the first thing. Is the person that is pointing you to a certain direction actually doing the will of the Father? And isn't that what the whole Sermon on the Mount is about? When you look at the sermon, when we do a story, we often put the emphasis on the end. But that is a very nowadays way of telling a story. You have very different ways of telling stories. And could it be that with this Sermon on the Mount, the emphasis is actually in the middle and all the rest is going around it? What is in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount? Lord, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's the Lord's Prayer. And again, like I said, the whole topic of the Sermon on the Mount is like our hearts. It's who are you going to follow? Whose desires are formed in your hearts? Because that is where the war is, isn't it? It's about, do I want my own kingdom, or am I serving a bigger kingdom? Am I kneeling before the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? Who do I follow? And so, how do you recognize who's leading you towards God? It is the one that has a heart that is bowed down to the King of Kings. Are you still following? Have I lost some of you? Laura said I was funny, so now I have to make a joke, right? Like, look at. And so Jesus, at the end, he says, and then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from you, you wonders of lawlessness. What is he speaking? I never knew you. I knew you is a picture of a covenant relationship. The audience that was sitting in front of Jesus knew exactly what he was talking about. We need some translation, but that points to covenant relationship. And a covenant relationship is when you are like, it is like a marriage. It's not a contract. It's where you become almost one. And Jesus says, I never had that covenant relationship with you. And then he confirms it with saying, you workers of lawlessness. How was the covenant given? It was through the Torah, through the Old Testament that it was given. And when he says, you workers of lawlessness, he says, you without law. You without my law, you without the Torah, what I've been saying. You following? Okay. I want to say who's not following, who did I leave behind, but nobody's going to raise their hands, right? We're in Belgium. What was I thinking? So how do we know who's pointing us to the right direction? Look at their lives over the course of a period. Look at the fruit they're carrying, and then look at their heart. When you are looking at their lives, are those fruits evidence of a life surrendered toward God, or is it a life that just wants to promote themselves? If it wants to promote themselves, don't trick yourself in thinking that they're going to lead you to Jesus. Right? What is the will of the Father? It is to love our neighbors as ourselves. It is to love righteousness and justice. Take care of the poor. We often see fruit as being able to prophesy, to heal, to cast out. And again, Jesus came and read out of Isaiah saying, like, I've come to set the prisoners free. But God's desire from that comes, those signs and wonders should come from a desire to see people in freedom, to see people going to life, not for the sake of those, just the signs and the wonders. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, you need to give a little bit more feedback. Does that make sense? Okay. So Jesus ends his whole Sermon on the Mount with one more picture. So we saw the roads, remember? We saw that we need people on those roads. This is why we have connect groups. Because you are not called alone to walk this alone. Don't fool yourself. God made Adam, and he was in perfect union with God. They walked together, right? There wasn't sin yet. And what did God say? It's not good for you to be alone. Why do we then sometimes think that we can be better alone? We need people. So please, we're going to start up the Connect Group season again. Find a group where you feel like those are my people, right? Because we all need that. And so Jesus ends with a last picture. After he looked at some people who were actually building their own stage, their own throne, instead of a surrendered life to Jesus. And now he paints a last picture and he addresses his audience again. And he says, everyone then who hears those words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who builds his house on the rock, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, because it has been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who builds his house on the sand, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Jesus again gives us, why does he give us pictures? Who likes movies and series and binge watch and okay, don't be timid. You're like, most of us do. And if you don't, you probably like books, right? Why? Because it paints pictures. And last week we had worship in a different way. Who was here last week? It's some stretching time, right? We read a part of the gospel and we let you picture it. Because our hearts works with pictures. And so Jesus gives again a picture. And when you see it, it calls a parable, but when you see it, a picture, you have to picture it. Right? You have to make an image of it. So I've helped you here come up with, I said I was generous with my images today. 2 pictures. 2 big houses. I would be happy in either one of them. Won't you? I don't know what your house looks like, but I do like forests more, so I would rather be in the forest than I don't like sand too much. But that being said, I would be happy in both of them, right? Jesus doesn't say there's a difference necessarily on how the house looks like, how many rooms it has, what material the house is from. Just says 2 houses. 2 houses. And they both suddenly encounter a storm. Out of the blue, huge storm. And there's water coming. And a couple of years ago, we had it in the south of Belgium, where suddenly rain came in Liège, and out of the blue, just water rose. And a whole area was underwater. And some people are still recovering from that. We had it this year, I think, in Texas, right? Where suddenly those floods came out of nowhere. And nobody had expected it. And lives were lost because of it. This is what a storm can do, right? And Jesus paints a picture of wind going against the house and water rising and all the waves hitting in. And it's like Jesus puts a film before us. I'm sure it wasn't a film, they didn't have that, but paints this picture and let us see those 2 houses. And then he says there was wind and there was storm. And people are looking at those 2 houses saying okay, what will happen? One of them totally collapsed. Jesus says the reason for that was it built on sand. And I'm not an engineer or whatever, but I did build some sand castles from time to time. And so when water comes on sand, it just moves. It moves. It's not stable. And so when you build a house on sand, and when water comes, it moves the foundation and it collapses the house. And the Bible said, and great was its fall. It wasn't just a little bit. It was great was its fall. Remember the roads. Now think about this picture. Again, Jesus is inviting us to think about the end. What is the end? It might look beautiful, or the road might be easy, but consider the end. And so at the end of his whole Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is saying, consider where you are walking. Consider how you are building. And what was the difference between the two? Both of them were hearing Jesus' words. But the difference was who applied it, who put it into practice in their lives, who was actually going with the uneasiness, like my friend in the Camino, being confronted with their own thoughts, with their own ways, with how they are doing. And that is the hardest thing. And it's one of the reasons why people stop the Camino, because it's too hard to not have any distraction and just left by our own. And here Jesus says, who is willing to walk this road and to allow my words to change you and adapt you and transform you into my image? That is a hard thing to do. And a lot of them are quitting along the way and are going to the easy path. But storms are going to come. What are storms? What are floods? In the Bible, it's the consequences of our own stupid decisions, of corporate stupid decisions, other people's stupid decisions, hurtful decisions, and cosmic, right? It's just things that happen that just suddenly comes at us. And it is in those moments that we see where our house is built on. But we don't have to wait for a storm, right? Again and again, Jesus sent people in our lives who said, let me show you, you're walking there, you're building on sand, let me show you another place to build your house on. Let me show you the narrow way. I know all your friends are there, but look where they're going. Let me point you to life. Let me point you to Jesus. And the people, from the 5 teachings, it's the only time that it is recorded how the people responded and where they're responding. When Jesus was finished, he's saying the crowds were astonished at his teachings. That describes a vivid reaction. Like they weren't just saying they weren't like you guys. You just point that out. They were reactive. They were like, what is he saying? But we know from reading the rest of the Gospels, not everyone applied those words. Some of them did, others didn't. So what about us? What about us? Which road are you walking on? You can only grow as much as you're honest. It starts with just being honest. And you know what? If you are reflecting and you feel just like, oh, I've been walking on this wrong road. It's nice here, like I can cruise, I can even take my car because it's wide and it's all those things. And it's like, and I know if I choose to go that path, it might be more difficult. I will be confronted with my own heart. And I will be left for a choice. But know that Jesus, I love what the Bible says, it is his love that rouses to repentance. Here is Jesus and he says, pick, choose, give it please. It's almost like he's begging and he's saying like, please choose life. Please. Think about it. Let me paint another picture. Let me show you two houses. Don't be foolish with the now. Think about the end. Which one do you want to choose? Think about the people that give you counsel in your life. Test them. Be a little bit suspicious. Ooh, have I really said that? Be wise, right? Test them. See if their hearts are surrendered to me and they're actually leading you to the right way. Because God did send us, give us people to walk with. But the biggest thing is, are you applying or are you just hearing? Are you taking those words of Jesus and applying them in your lives? Are you allowing the Holy Spirit to transform you more and more into Jesus? Remember, in the middle is a prayer. Remember? Again and again we saw that Jesus said, here's my standard. It's way higher, not just outward. I want to touch your heart. And then he says, but my Father is a good Father who gives you what you need. He started with giving us Jesus because he knows that our hearts can't do it alone. So don't fool yourself that you can just walk out here and say well, I'm going to make myself better so I'm presentable before God. That will never work. This is why Jesus came. And he said, I'm going to die so I can give you a new heart. And I'm going to put my spirit in you. And I'm going to write my law inside of your heart so you can walk in it. How amazing is our God? We just sung about it. Come on, my soul. Don't be quiet. Lift up, because this is our God. Let me say you, this is the only religion where God himself came and helped us out of our mess because he so loved us. All other religions, you have to work yourself. And here comes the God that I'm serving, and he comes to our mess. And he says, let me grab you. Let me pay the price. Let me give you a new heart, a heart that desires me. You don't have to do it alone. So we're going to have communion after I've landed and I've prayed for you guys. But we're going to do it a little bit different. Laura said, this is the last time we're going to be in connect groups according to the colors. And we're gonna invite you to do it with your connect group. So with the people you're placed in. Because we wanna tell you that communion is not just something for on a Sunday. You can do it with your spouse, with your friend. What is communion? It's remembering that he died for you. It's making even a proclamation in the spirit realm saying Jesus won. Jesus died, but he rose again, and he declaring his victory, his kingship, his lordship. And so we want to invite you to, if you are part of, you have given your life to Jesus, we want to invite you to partake in that and to remember that. So you can do that with your connect groups.